Hi everyone, my name's Roman from the International Sports Tax Association. Today we will be interviewing Ciarán Medlar, who is the partner in charge of private client services at BDO Ireland. He heads up the Sports Advisory Unit, which is the first Irish professional services firm to have a dedicated sports unit. And he's also the chairman of Shamrock Rovers, which are a League of Ireland Premier Division club since 2020. Ciarán, can I ask you to provide us with a little highlight of your career so far?
Hi, Roman. Good to talk to you this morning. Originally we are a professional tax practice, and as you said, I headed the private clients area. So within that, we advise, like most tax practice, we advise a multitude of professionals, medical people, owner-managers of businesses. But as part of that, we've actually carved out a niche area in sports advisory, which started back in the 1990s and was formalized, I suppose, in 2005 when we established a formal unit to deal with sports advisory services for a range of sports clients. So that's a combination of national governing bodies, amateur sports clubs, professional sports clubs, and a particular niche area in advising professional athletes across a wide variety of sports, primarily in football, rugby, golf, and boxing. It's quite a varied sort of client base we have across the sports space. So it means you deal with a lot of different aspects of it, whether it's employer issues, whether it's actually employee issues, etc. So it varies quite a lot. We were lucky to break into the space. I had an interest in sport and in the business of sport, and we picked up a couple of clients along the way. And over time, that evolved into actually something a bit bigger than that. As clients referred future clients onto us, as we learned more about the space, as the industry evolved, which has happened a lot over the last 20 years. I mean, and continues to do so. So we were sort of lucky to be in the right place at the right time, and very privileged to actually pick up some really interesting clients, sports clients along the way. And as I say, establish our expertise in the area and build a team. So now the team is not just me. There's quite a number of people on the team, up to about 10 people working on sports clients here throughout the year.
Amazing. And those first few clients that came through, obviously you didn't necessarily have the sports industry experience. So what do you think it was that kind of had them come to you?
Yeah, well, we had some clients in the sports area who were more in the actual advisory piece, but the actual sports clients themselves would have come from that source, and we would have worked and done quite a bit of pro bono work at the start around advising sports professionals starting out in their journey, but also people who are coming to the end. I think the initial work we did was around sports testimonials and how they're set up and structured here in Ireland, and advising on all the financial and business aspects of that. And from that, I suppose that gave us a bit of a foothold in the industry, and we built up, as I say, a bit of an expertise, a bit of a name around working in the space, and our client base grew slowly in the initial period, and then over time it grew into something broader.
Right. And what was it like trying to pull together that kind of knowledge of the sports industry and how it overlaps with the tax advisory services that you were providing?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, we are a tax advisory practice, so it was tax advice we were providing. So it was boring stuff. We were doing compliance, which is boring but very important for the clients, and from protection of brand. And we'll probably come back to that just later on. But around that whole security and knowledge that they knew they were well looked after on that side, and they could focus on what they were supposed to do. So it was important to give them the comfort that we had the technical expertise in a sort of a niche area to actually make sure that we could answer and plan with them as they needed during their careers.
And having had all that experience, let's say specifically for private individuals, what are some of the things where you see advice being required?
Well, as I said, the athlete is very focused on their career, which is absolutely what they should be doing. So they need someone in the background to make sure they're structured correctly for their on-field income, for their off-field income, for their commercial income, etc. And also planning. We advise them very early on to plan for their post-career, financial position from day one, even though they're very, very young. It doesn't really resonate with some of the athletes, but it's a very important part of what we do. Like, our approach is very much a long-term relationship, and we add real value when the athlete finishes their professional career as opposed to during it. So it's around that sort of making compliance is sorted. Their residence is like, it's an international type business, so residence becomes a big issue for athletes as to where they're going to be based, where they're going to be resident, where they're going to be paying taxes. So that's the sort of comfort you want to get, to build that relationship early on, that you give them that trust in you, trust for them, trust for their families, trust for their agents, that they're with the right people. So they're actually, that the financial piece is fully secure, the tax piece is fully compliant, and there's nothing going to come back and bite them later on.
And then from the corporate side, I know that you work with clubs and national governing bodies. What are the kind of key tax areas that you see people requiring advice for there?
Well, for the club, professional amateur clubs, first of all, in Ireland, we have a number of tax reliefs available for amateur clubs where they get tax exempt status on their income. There's also programs in place where they can actually raise finance in it, and so the donor will qualify for tax relief for the contribution to sports clubs, for capital development, for development of football pitches, for development of I don't know, any sort of capital expenditure they would have around the club. So there are different issues for each one. For the professional clubs, then it's typically around employment structures and trying to actually help them secure athletes or secure players in a team environment in a tax efficient way as much as possible. That can tend to be a combination of salary, image rights, or some sort of inducement type structure they might have in place, structuring their deals to attract athletes to the club. So that would be applying for that. For national government bodies, then it tends to be more raising awareness amongst their members around tax issues, tax compliance issues, which would equally apply to professional athletes.
Great. And I think, we've been speaking recently about potentially hosting a webinar and having you come to speak about the tax breaks that are available for athletes that are retiring in Ireland. Maybe you could give us kind of a little overview of what that might cover.
Yeah, the Irish government in 2002 introduced an interesting initiative to try and encourage our elite athletes to continue to stay and play in Ireland. So it established a number of sports that qualified for this relief. So basically, if a player or an athlete carries out the profession in Ireland, they can claim tax relief back on the 10 best years of earnings from playing the sport. So 40% of the income becomes exempt from tax when they retire. So it effectively turns into a significant tax refund when they finish, to allow them to actually re-educate themselves, invest for the next part of their career, or just reintegrate themselves into some other role outside of sport when they finish. So it's been particularly successful in the area of rugby, where we have our elite rugby players stay playing in Ireland, and certainly the governing body here in Ireland, which employs the rugby players, would use that as a part of their negotiation. That is a factor in encouraging players to stay here. It equally applies for football players, although the domestic league in Ireland is not at the same financial level as the Premier League in the UK, clearly. But you would have that, and for horse racing, for boxers, across a range of sports, it's definitely a factor in people deciding where they're going to live and pay their taxes. So it was a clever move by the government to, one, they've got an elite sports person playing here every week. The attendances go up, the tourism costs go up, etc. You've got and paying taxes they go, and encourage them to spend time in Ireland, be in Ireland, and obviously give them a refund when they finish, actually to encourage that behaviour. Right. But it's been very, very successful.
Good. And then I guess maybe on the flip side, as you're well aware, that in the UK, the HMRC have football units that look into investigations around tax for professional footballers. Is there any kind of hot areas for Ireland where investigations are kind of happening in the sports industry?
No, the professional games in Ireland are not as evolved as they are in the UK. So more of the focus would be on our Irish clients who are based in the UK. So the issues you're talking about would apply for our clients, albeit as non-domiciled UK residents. But the same issues. I mean, you saw recently the noise around the actual large-scale tax avoidance, reported about large-scale tax avoidance around agency fees, yes. Which was quite sensational, and talked about $500 million potentially of tax being avoided, which when you drilled into it, I know Sophia from ISTA has done a good response on that, actually talking about how it's not that straightforward when you drill into it. Like the arrangement, agents do operate for both parties sometimes, etc. So the tax issues you're seeing are exactly the same tax issues that we're seeing. I'd say around image rights structures. Are they valid? Are they actually being exploited by the clubs? Are they commercially valid arrangements? So that all has to stack up. So I think that's welcome, I suppose, that the scrutiny is there once it's establishing that what is being structured is actually robust and is a fair way of paying tax. I think so they're the two key challenges, was the agency fees and the image rights sales. Although we have, like, the whole industry is changing all the time, so you've got there's new items coming on the agenda for us as advisors. It's around tax advice, the tax issues that arise around, say, the long-term deals that clubs are now using to get around the financial fair play, and also the likes of, say, Live Golf coming into the industry, where there's huge capital upfront payments as opposed to reward for playing. So how they're going to be taxed, how we see them, how they're going to be taxed, and then the tax authorities also learning about these new structures and how they should be taxed. And so they're the sort of constantly evolving issues that we see on a day-to-day basis for tax purposes, which are relevant for both us as advisors, for the athlete, and obviously for the tax authorities.
Great. From the career development side, what are some of the advice that you would give, or I don't know, maybe more around how you've built and kind of like nurtured your relationship with clients? Because obviously BDO Ireland has such a great reputation in this industry. So how have you gone about building that?
Well, there is a lot of investment, I suppose. There's one is to make sure you're technically competent to do it, and so research, learning, constantly learning that side of it, and two is building the long-term relationships and building the networks and profiles actually to establish yourself in the space, and that's a constant. Like, I mean, so it's important to put a bit of time into that and to learn that side of it. But the key elements, I suppose, are competency, I suppose connectivity with the clients, and to be able to connect to clients. Like, I mean, I'm a lot older than you are, Roman, so I'm dealing with some clients who are maybe 20 years of age. So for them to relate to me is probably harder. But you actually have to, I suppose, you have to give them the comfort that you're going to give them the proper advice, build that trust with the client, and as they build the trust with the people around them, which tends to be family at that early stage of the career, and agents and so on later on, will become that sort of very central part, because tax does play a part in most aspects of the decisions they're making, whether it's around signing contracts, whether it's about moving abroad, about buying property, about, you know, post-career planning. Their investment piece, there's definitely sort of, they tend to rely on us not to give investment advice, but just to sort of sense check the investment advice. There are some really good wealth management advisors, but there's also some who may not be so good when there's a lot of money arising in a player's career. So being able to build that trust with the clients, they trust you to actually represent them in all these areas. And the last bit is flexibility. They don't work in a 9-to-5 environment, so it is a 7-day week. You can get calls on a Sunday morning or a Saturday night about some issue that's arisen around it, and it mightn't be tax, because over time that evolves into a much broader business advisor role. Tax is the initial sort of entry point, I would have thought, into it, but then it's trying to, I suppose, being comfortable in giving that sort of broader, you know, you are with them, and they need to feel you're with them, I suppose, as athletes, that you will advise them and be there to support them on the decisions they need to make. So I say it is a long-term sort of road, a long-term relationship. I think, as I mentioned earlier on, our real value comes later in their careers, as opposed to when they're playing in the middle of their careers. It's minding it so it's ready for when they finish. That's they have options, and they're financially secure, and the issues tend not to be around financial issues, whether they have enough money left or not. It's more about what they plan to do post playing full-time professional sport. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Do you think there is more that the industry could be doing to help young players understand more about tax?
Yeah, it's because we're an international association now, which that you've established. I mean, it's different. I mean, some markets are much more evolved in that area than others. Like, I mean, in many countries there are no specific tax legislation. There is no specific tax legislation, in place. So it's just general. It's a general tax law. Where in other countries it's quite detailed. You've got issues around withholding tax and all, which don't apply in many countries. But it's much more legislated for. So I'm not sure there's anything that we can be doing as tax advisors to be advising them, or what employers can be. It's really on a case-by-case basis, I think, and it's there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
There is a bit, I suppose, for people starting out in their career. There is a bit of an investment by us, because every sports star is not going to make it. So you can't really go in. So there is a bit of pro bono work, or certainly that you will take on a client and charge low fees initially because it's a longer term build of a relationship, and that's part and parcel of it, and that's what you do, and so it's that's the only way to influence. Yeah.
Is there any other advice that you would have for maybe more junior professionals in the tax industry if they're interested in having sports clients that they could do to maybe start getting on that path?
I think it's trying to broaden out your skill base. It's not simply just tax compliance. I mean, that is certainly important, but over time you're building it out to broader advice. And I say whether it's around actually, I say the longer term sort of advice, business advice, learning about some of the legal issues. I mean, not in depth, but certainly learning about some of how contracts are constructed, what is allowed commercially, what image rights opportunities people have, what the contract allows them to or not allows them to do, understanding off-field earnings, understanding how this is all evolving, how new streams of income are constantly coming on board through digitization, through I suppose how you monetize the brands in different way, whether it's from a book deal, whether it's from actually some sort of, I suppose, digital rights that you can actually sell or derive value from. It is a strange world in that the income profile of the athletes is inverted insofar as that a lot of income happens in the first 10 to 15 years of your career, and you're trying to manage that post-career. So even that longer term thinking as well as just the tax advice. So they're trying to, where their peers are actually will be the opposite. I mean, they come to the end of their career and hopefully they have significant funding in place, but it is an odd environment because there's so much money in an early stage of their lives. Hopefully, if they're playing in the right sport and that at the time, then they're trying to make sure that money is not the challenge they have ahead of them. It's different challenges they will have.
Yeah. And given, the age of some of the clients that come through, how do you find engaging them on the topic of tax and helping them understand that it's actually something that's really integral to what they're doing?
Yeah, I think most will get that. Most are very aware of the brand, of their brand, right? So the brand damage of not being compliant is something that most of the athletes will be aware, even at a very young age. I mean, as I said, they're focused on the actual sport itself, but they know that there is a value of the brand, and the cost of brand damage is huge. And accordingly, most of them do not want to have aggressive investments, and most certainly do not want to have aggressive tax planning. So I think people are happy. They're earning a lot of money, so they want to pay the right tax as opposed to pay no tax. So you see some of the global superstars who would have, it just shows you how the industry has evolved, like where the use of convoluted offshore structures were quite common in image rights structures. More and more, even if it's tax correct or technically correct from a tax point of view, it doesn't feel right in the marketplace that someone has this sort of structure in place when they're earning a lot of money playing football, for example. So more and more people will actually have their image in commercialized structures in an onshore environment and accept that they have to pay tax on it, and it's much better with them and their brand. Yeah. So even those sort of non-aggressive tax planning, I think, is something they want. Despite them hearing stories about you can do this and the other, actually most will come back and say, listen, no, I'm happy to pay the right amount of tax, and I understand that there's a tax liability. So they're not chasing something that is going to be damaging to them, and rightly so, that they're aware of the impact of not being on the right side of the compliance, not being on the right side of the structures that they put in place, and are happy to pay tax in the jurisdictions that are due to get the tax, albeit in the most efficient way.
You're paying like you said, the right amount of tax rather than overpaying. So what advice would you give to professionals who want to start working with sports clients, and how can they go about building a strong network in the sports industry?
Well, I think it's important actually to get out there, and it is hard work that you have to put in a bit of time sort of to build your network, to build your profile, and try and win a few clients early on. And that can mean investing a bit of time in young clients where they're not in a position to pay your fees, but also allow you to invest in some pro bono work around maybe some of the players' representation organizations to give some tax advice around that, or some of the national governing bodies. But you might be able to give something back to help you actually build that network, build that profile, which is very important. And from that, I think over time you will become known for the expert in your particular area, and it will grow for you. I think joining certain professional groupings is very important. I think the establishment of the International Sports Tax Association by yourself, Roman, and others has been really welcome. I mean, there is a small group of people working in this area, so across the various jurisdictions and countries, it's important to be able to just even to reach out to people for clients who are actually either engaging in something in that country or moving to that country, to have that, build that network up. So organizations that allow you to build your own network in that way, again, are very important, to build that expertise, to share the expertise that you have, because while we all advise tax clients, it is quite a unique environment in sports for lots of different reasons. So anything that's going to help you to get a foothold, I would encourage. And the other thing I'd say is that it is changing. It's constantly changing. So spending time in your own learning and development around trying to understand what's happening in sport, and how it impacts on someone's tax or financial position, and how you can actually be better placed to advise on that, is something you should spend a bit of time on.
So Ciarán, can you share some highlights of your career over the last 20 years, and what were some of the most memorable experiences you've had working with sports clients?
Yeah, we've been very privileged to work with some really high-profile sports clients and to understand how they think and their mindsets. So some of the most memorable pieces have been with maybe some of the lower-profile clients we've had, but just, I mean, their approach to how they perform, actually, you learn a lot from being close to them. So that's been good. I suppose two issues stand out, or two cases stand out, which one was in 2002, the Republic of Ireland qualified for the World Cups, the World Cup, and they received a bonus for doing so, and we were able to actually leverage off. Most of our players at the time would have been playing football in the UK, so they were resident in the UK. So HMRC were focused on this bonus payment that they received, and we were able to structure it on the basis that payment that they received was similar to the payment that the English World Cup team received back in 1966, right, which was a case taken by Bobby Moore, a famous case where the English players received £1,000, which wasn't excessive even in those days for winning the World Cup. But they successfully won the case that it should not be taxed on the basis that it was a unique achievement and a once-off payment received. So hence it would fall into an exempt category. Our case, Ireland doesn't qualify for as many World Cups, unfortunately, and so that was still, albeit it wasn't the first World Cup, was quite a unique achievement to have done so. Yeah. And we argued successfully that the payment should equally apply, that it should not be subject to tax in the UK, which the players collectively won, which was a huge achievement. So myself and two colleagues here, Pat O'Brien and Mark Hines, would have worked very closely on that case, and it was a huge win for us. Like, I mean, it gave us a huge foothold again in the industry. That was a starting point for us, that case was won. And more recently, which is not wasn't a tax thing, but it evolved from being tax advisors to the players. We act for both the men's and women's team in Ireland, and in 2021 there was an equal pay deal for the men's and women's senior national teams. It was actually agreed with the FAI, and in fairness, there's a huge amount of goodwill behind it. So the FAI themselves wanted to make it happen. The women's team clearly wanted to make it happen, and the men's team also, through Seamus Coleman. Seamus Coleman was the Irish captain, and Katie McCabe was the women's captain, and they both worked very well together. So the men came down, and the women went up to meet in the middle. So it was a huge achievement it's great for us to be involved in that, advising both the men's and women's team to get to that point, because it was a landmark sort of agreement that the equal pay deal, like the Irish Football Association, to their credit, were probably the first, or certainly one of the first to achieve that in professional sports, professional football, the men's and women's team. So that was a landmark one to be involved in. It was great. So just, I suppose, it's not just tax. I suppose it evolves into the broader range of advice over time as well, from that initial introduction through tax.
Yeah, and also to be involved in these kind of historical moments of Irish sport as well, right? In terms of
to be involved in any way in it, and obviously we're only part of it, but it was great to be involved advising the two sets of players. Yeah.
And looking forward, are there any kind of emerging trends or challenges that you're seeing in the sports tax field?
No, it's just as I say, it is that evolving industry. It is that sort of, it is constantly changing. So how sports are actually delivered on a broadcasting network, how sports are actually, how the athlete is rewarded for that. Esports, which is constantly, I mean, it's hard to keep up with all what's happening in sport at the moment. Income streams are changing, broadcasting deals are changing. So both for clubs and for professional athletes, trying to keep ahead of that and how you understand what the income streams are going to be, how they should be structured to receive those income streams. It's something that they're the real key issues, as opposed to any one particular point. Certainly in some jurisdictions there are commentaries and some focus on the points we mentioned earlier around, the image rights, the agency fees, withholding tax issues. They're going to be there anyway, but it's more like trying to keep up with the constant change in the nature of sport. professional sport, which is ever changing. So.